Chief Warrant Officer for Big Pinion, U.S. Navy retired, telling some stories of my naval career. This is part 2 of my story that I titled Consequences of Accepting Mediocrity. Now, I told you in part 1 about losing the aircraft off Catapult 1, it sinking with the pilot on board never recovering either, and with the catapult malfunctioning and being operated illegally, and of the launch valve room being determined by the accident investigation as being a contributing factor to the failure of electronic components of the catapult, electronic control components. So I'm going to start part 2 with the history of the Midway's catapults. Okay, she was the first to have the rotary low-loss launch valves with constant pressure steam accumulator and capacity selector valve, where you set the opening rate of speed of the launch valves, and the control circuit control that, and you, as a catapult officer, dial that in as to program the catapult to launch each individual airplane. She was the first aircraft carrier to be permanently home ported in a foreign country, Japan, Yokosuka, Japan, and not have a full-time CAFSU representative in its home port. They had to send one from somewhere else if they wanted to send one to Japan when the ship was in its home port. Had a split sea duty tour for first-term enlisted people and for unaccompanied married career persons and for officers, with the first half being on board the Midway and the other half being on a stateside ship or elsewhere. There was no maintenance chief assigned to the V-2 division, the Catapult and Rescue Division. And I believe she was the only ship in the United States Navy, the only aircraft carrier that had Catapult Rescue that did not have a full-time maintenance chief assigned. As a matter of fact, at the time I reported aboard, there was only one ABE chief on board, no senior chief, no master chief in V-2 division. And that guy was the catapult chief. Now, some problems. The launch valve room was extremely hot, which contributed to the adjoining spaces being hot. The crew and supervisors of the catapults accepted that hot space situation. No one pressed the issue of getting the ventilation system, which served that launch valve room, troubleshot and repaired, until I personally did it. It was too hot for people to enter during catapult operations. You simply couldn't breathe in there. The catapult officer's center deck stationed capacity selector valve control box, which was the catapult officer's command station. It frequently malfunctioned, causing erroneous mismatches, indications between the commanded and the indicated capacity selector valve setting. The circuit boards inside the capacitor selector valve electronics package frequently failed. The frequent incidence of the catapult control circuit electrical grounds throughout the catapult. Now, a reaction to problems. This is the first reaction to problems. Story number 1. The hot space situation encouraged the cat crew to not switch the control circuit to cut out the failed but center deck CSV package and operate under the alternate when the center deck CSV box failed. Instead, they simply verified a match by looking at the electronic matching numbers on the main control console, which did in the past, the history of this catapult, show a match to the commanded setting. They believed that a fail-safe relay that was inside the electronics package would prevent the catapult from firing in the case of an actual mismatch. They believed that. By doing it this way, they didn't go inside that hot launch valve room to verify a match, simply by seeing it on the mechanical counter. Now, when an electronics package circuit board failed, there was 5 plug-in type circuit boards inside the electronic package. The technical publications required replacing it with a ready-for-issue spare that you drew from supply. Because of the frequency of failure, you couldn't do that. There was only one spare of each of these circuit boards allowed on board in the supply department, and it was mandatory to turn in required coded. So you had to turn in the failed one when you drew the one from supply. Well, it would take weeks to get a replacement in supply when these things fail several times a week on each catapult. That wasn't enough spares to do that with. So they had acquired a half dozen spares by hook and crook. I suspect that the CAPSU representatives from Subic Bay in the Philippines had gotten those from somewhere, somehow, and provided them to the ship. Well, what they would do, when one of them would fail, they would send it down to the ship's ET shop, electronics technician's shop. And they would troubleshoot it and find out what had failed on it. And they would replace that component. It was usually a diode that would blow. They'd replace that diode and call, and then CAT chief would send a non-rate man down to pick it up and he'd bring it back and he'd throw it in his locker among the rest of them that had been repaired by that same ET shop. To await swap out when another one failed. Now the sequence of failure, this is my analysis of this particular accident, which I discovered over a lengthy period of time after I reported aboard. The R5 CSB circuit board failed, and the CAT chief or the CAT captain, somebody, swapped it out and directed continued use of the catapult. They didn't run the catapult through a test series to test it out, see if it worked right. They just swapped it out and continued launching. Well, the launching officer dialed in the capacitor selector valve setting, and the console operator pushed the button to set the valve. The launching officer noticed a mismatch on his center deck box and asked if the console operator had a match. Well, he did on his main control console electronic panel. The catapult was fired, resulting in the slow shot. The defectively repaired circuit board was replaced with another immediately after the accident and not reported. I believe the catapult chief himself did this, but I don't know. This is just my analysis of it. The repair, exactly what happened now? The repaired circuit board that the chief installed to replace the failed one had been defectively repaired, then used without benefit of being tested. I believe that a diode had been installed backwards on that board, which allowed current to flow backwards through the circuit, which prematurely stopped the CSB from setting, matched the commanded numbers on the main control panel, showing that the valve was set correctly, although the center deck panel showed it was a mismatch, and activated the fail-safe relay to allow the CAT to fire with this mismatch. The center deck box was correct this time. Main control panel was wrong. All right. Now, except in mediocrity, when, who? The monthly PMS check to clean the vent filter that served this launch valve room had been gun-decked for years. At least a decade, I discovered. It was plugged up with debris that prevented any air from flowing through that vent valve, which allowed that launch valve room to become so hot. End of part 2. Y'all carry on.